practicing graphic design, which I loved, and at Naval Institute back in the 1960s, and I was surrounded by incredible graphic designers. They were producing books for the Navy. Their approach to design was just wonderful, and I was so inspired that by seeing them working and the way they worked, that after 3 years I decided to go back to school and get my degree in graphics from MICA. And then I was doing graphics for, I don't know, 40 years or so. When I was at MICA, I took a calligraphy class, not knowing what was involved. It was just a foundation course that I had to take. I liked it, and I kept studying and found that the more you know about calligraphy, the more there is to know, and it's like almost everything else. It's a bottomless well of information. One of the things I did, somehow I got tied in with a Washington caterer who catered big Washington events and weddings. She didn't hire me, she just referred me to her clients with no commission, just do the work and do it right. So I did all these weddings, designing the invitation, everything that goes with the invitations, the maps and the save the date cards and the response cards, and then addressing the envelopes. There was always high pressure to get it right. It was always a deadline, a lot of pressure, but I was able to use wonderful materials, wonderful papers. I had a paper merchant in Hagerstown, and I would order a truck full of paper to be delivered, and he would bring it and load it. So these invitations were really special. So that brings me to ink. I've touched on the calligraphy, and that was a major part of my life and my career. Pens, to start with. These are my everyday pens that I use. I keep them over here and I just pick up whichever one I need. I'm left-handed. Nobody told me when I started out that you can't do this, you can't do calligraphy, you're left-handed. So I just started doing it. I didn't know I wasn't able to do it. I just did it. One time my teacher came and looked over my shoulder. He said, "You'll never be a calligrapher." And of course that made me really work at it. And I saw him several years later, maybe 20 years later, at a calligraphy conference. He said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I'm a calligrapher." The speedball, and I also use Mitchell pens for most of my calligraphy. My father went to a yard sale and found an old calligraphy set for $7 and asked me if I wanted it. I said, "Yeah, I'll take it." And it had these 2 pen holders with built-in reservoirs. Now, most reservoirs are really complex things, like this speedball has a built-in reservoir and you can't clean it. But this has the reservoir specifically for the Mitchell pens, and the nib comes out, and this little brass thing that becomes the reservoir, and it holds just the right amount of ink. They don't make them like this anymore. From here, they went to a spoon type, which held too much ink and was useless. And now they have a detachable little thing that goes on the nib that constantly falls off into the ink and is equally useless. So most people don't, or a lot of people don't use Mitchell pens. But as long as I can preserve these 2, I'm good. And I'm very, very careful with them. I have a bunch of these that I've acquired somewhere. They're offset, and they just work really well for me. So I use this all the time, and I have a whole box full of them, so I'll never run out. But there are all kinds of different varieties of pens. Some are broad. Some have openings so that, you know, if you wanted to make 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, a 5-line stroke if you're doing a beautiful big letter. I've never been very good at it. One of them always runs out of ink though. There are pens made out of reeds. This is a bamboo I made in a workshop many years ago. I use a lot of the Phragmites from the beach. I have a lifetime supply down there. Being left-handed, I cut my nibs on a slight cant to the left. Of course, the original pens were quills, animal quills, usually from the right primary feathers of a goose. I made a little reservoir for this so it would hold a little bit more ink. Just a little piece of brass in there. And cutting quills is an art in itself. There are demonstrations online where you can see how it's cut. Cut from the sides, and then you cut away some of the top, and then you cut across, and then you cut a slit. And the slit is done by putting this thing on your thumbnail somehow and taking your knife and pushing into the quill and hoping it doesn't go through to your thumbnail or to your thumb. I don't do that. The reeds came first, I think. They originated in the Nile region, Egypt area, where they worked on papyrus, and papyrus was made with the fibers from a papyrus plant and sliced real thin and hammered together. The pulp in the fibers held the fibers together, and a reed was the ideal instrument. There were plenty available. Like here, we have Phragmites. There they had whatever reeds they had along the Nile. There's something about the texture of the reed, the wooden reed on the papyrus is a beautiful experience. The same with the quill on the vellum that was used for all the medieval books. Just writing with a quill on vellum is a beautiful experience. That just flowed, the materials just mesh together beautifully. The ruling pen is a mechanical device that was used by engineers and architects for the last couple hundred years. And it's a very mechanical thing. You take a dropper, usually India ink was used, which has a shellac base, and the India ink comes in a little bottle with a dropper. Take a dropper and you drop a couple drops of ink in the reservoir between the two prongs here. Then you'd use your T-square or your ruler and you'd run a straight line on your paper, and that's how you got all your straight lines for all the architectural renderings. One calligrapher one time was doing this, the mechanical pen, and he said, and he got this beautiful line with the ink flowing out and spattering all over the place. And he said, man, that's for me. I've discovered something wonderful. So he started developing a whole writing system based on using the ruling pen. Pretty soon it caught on with calligraphers. Of course, then the variations set in. And people started making folded pens. This one's my favorite. It was made by a Chinese fellow in Chicago. And it's made out of brass and it's folded over. And it has a curved edge, slightly curved edge here, so that with control, you can get a very fine line by just using the point. The ink will flow through. This acts as a reservoir holding the tension between the two. You can get a very fine line, or you can lean it down slightly and get a broader line, and you can go to extreme and get a really broad line. And people started making them out of all kinds of materials. This is just made out of a piece of tin, and you fold it over and then you cut. Then somebody discovered that you can make them out of Coca-Cola cans. Really thin metal, and you can cut it with a scissor. You can mass produce these things, and you know, it's the same thing. It works. Japanese and Chinese sumi ink. They're made by burning wood or plants. They burn in this room. They burn the wood, and they have white sheets of paper all around, and the soot settles on the sheets of paper. And then after a couple hours, they shake the paper off, and here you have this nice pile of soot. And then they use that to make the ink, and they form the ink sticks. And they're lettered, they're impressed and designed and color added. And this is indigo, and supposedly if you're writing on black paper, the indigo shows up really nicely on black paper. 1 year. And we come in the morning, you know, a whole group of calligraphers getting together, eating breakfast, and, you know, all the excitement. And then we come into the studio, and we'd sit down, and the first thing we have to do is grind our ink for the morning. So we'd all sit there, and we'd put the water in the ink in the stone, and you just the stick back and forth on the stone, and it combines with that little bit of water that's in there, and you keep grinding until you have a morning supply of ink. As someone explained to me, it's a vegetable product, so over time it will fade. It's not archival. What I use is still called walnut ink, but it's really made from peat moss. This person described to me, peat moss is already halfway on its way to becoming coal, so it will last forever. I buy it in crystal form. You dissolve it in water, takes a little while, and I mix up a substantial amount of it. Over time, if it's left exposed to the air will evaporate the water, and it will return to its crystal form. You haven't lost it, you just regenerate it again. And you can, by mixing it with water, you can control whether you want it really dark, really light, or anything in between. The thing about it that makes it so unique, aside from the fact that it's just a gorgeous color, it's completely water soluble. So after it's dry, you can paint with it or letter with it. Calligraphers love to letter with it, one, because it's beautiful, but two, because it's transparent. You can see the pen strokes where they overlap, and it's very good for teaching. You can show that this pen stroke started here in this part of the letter and went out this way. You can tell the direction and the overlap. It's very good for teaching, and it's good for lettering just because it's so beautiful. You can get an image on it. I'll start everybody's favorite texturing tool, bubble wrap. Oh, let's do a little more. Lift the water. I mean, this is just too much fun.